Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 129 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and now over 350 partnering organizations from around the world. We've had over 600 speakers since we started on the 22nd of May. As each day, we've just created an open space for people worldwide to come together to share their feelings and experiences, their hopes and aspirations, and confer on how we can increase our strategic effectiveness. As I was preparing for this week, over the weekend, I could just feel, a kind of a tightness in the pit of my stomach and a tightness in my shoulders and neck as I began to just sort of take in, as we were on a full moon. It was Halloween. Today on November 2nd is the Feast of All Hallows. This is the time when the veil between the worlds is especially thin. And I was feeling the immensity of history. And kind of getting myself emotionally prepared for all the lockdowns that are taking place all over Europe, where I am, the ongoing climactic extreme weather events that are happening all over the world. And starting tomorrow, the US election, where it's not clear whether the democratic institutions of the United States of America, the longest continuous democracy in the history of the world, will any longer endure. So this is a huge week for all of us, because the consequences of the US election, just like the consequences of the pandemic, are global and will be fundamentally transformational of our identity as upholders of civility and democracy and humanity, ethics. And whether when the scales are weighed, justice or the dark side prevails. This is one of those times when we are caught and being weighed in the balances of history. It's discerning palpably the values of each one of our hearts as a collective. So it's in this spirit that I just wanted to welcome all of you today. Now to commence our program, I would like to turn it over to my good friend and co-moderator, Sabina van Gafka. Sabina.
Thank you so much, Jim. And I also want to extend a warm welcome to all of our viewers around the world and all of you game changers, shapeshifters, and catalysts for change, because that is truly what Humanity Rising and many others are sort of trying to facilitate, that we are also part of the solution, even in these times that we're in now, as Jim not least spoke about. And of course, with the election tomorrow in the United States of America and all that implies. I think it's even more important for platforms and ecosystems and spaces like this, where we can come together and share and bounce our different perspectives between each other to sort of also align again with our own truth and our own values, and not sort of get shattered away with everything that's going on with the news and all of the different aspects that we're, to put it mildly, constantly are being bombarded with. It's so important that we take a breath and really come back to our own core. And without putting any perspective maybe on the US election, I wanted to give a more philosophical approach to it. And by doing that, praising Buckminster Fuller, who most of you I'm sure already know, we've quoted him several times, but for those of you who don't, he's an American system theorist, author, inventor, and futurist when he was alive. And he had sort of a global mission and vision that was many times reflected in a question that he would ask himself and also the audience when he spoke to them around the world. And, you know, the question was, how do we make the world work 100% for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological damage or disadvantage to anyone? And even though that's not maybe correlated in what we're actually talking in the narrative of politics, it sort of brings it back to the narrative of humanity, which I think is a really important point of view to have in these turbulent and uncertain times that we have. It's not just a question of politics, even though that is a dominating factor at the moment. It also is, we as humanity must also navigate and sort of have that vision of where are we heading and where do we want to head? Which narrative do we want to align with? And Buckminster Fuller also said that never forget, no matter how overwhelming life changes and problems seem to be, that one person can make a difference in the world. In fact, it's always because of one person that all changes of matter in the world come about. So be that one person. Because if we're all that one person, we will exponentially become more in unity and in collaboration. And as we're talking about the US election, I just wanted to quote one of America's presidents when he said, this is John F. Kennedy, "Let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix the blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future." And with that, let's have 1 minute, or I invite you to 1 minute heart coherence to really open our hearts, open our minds, and to align to this sacred space that we now have for the next 1.5 hours each and every day, or at least Monday to Friday, where we can truly be in resonance with each other and in resonance with the different perspectives that we bring to the table. So with exhales and inhales, for just 1 minute, let's unite heart coherence. And even though it's just 1 minute, it's so important if each and every one of us, in times when we feel uncertain or in times when there's just too much noise going on, just taking that short minute or 30 seconds, 40 seconds of just inhaling, exhaling, how profound, but yes, simple that manner of being is. And now I'd like to hand over the word to Shelley Acorn, who most of you also know. She's the CEO of Ubiquity University, a scholar of totalitarianism, who is also a close observer of politics and the culture in America. And I hand over the word to you now, Shelley, to give us yet another dimension and perspective of what is going on around the world, not least with the US election. So over to you.
Before Shelley comes on, everyone, I just wanted to make one quick comment or two just to contextualize things. First of all, just to remind everyone that Ubiquity University is distinctive from other universities in the sense that we take a stand. Our stand is our brand. We've taken a stand on climate change. We took a stand on the pandemic, and that's why we have Humanity Rising. We've also taken a stand on Donald Trump and the nature of his administration in the United States, and the gravity of his attempts to subvert the democratic process and assure a continuation of power by means of coercion and subterfuge. So as we enter in this week, it's just very important for everyone to know that we are convening this whole session of Humanity Rising as a way to enable all of us to understand more deeply what it is that is taking place. I've made the statement several times that 4 more years of Donald Trump, particularly within the context of a subversion of democracy, is far more dangerous than the pandemic. And over the course of the next several days, we're going to see whether the democratic institutions in the United States that have been fashioned now for nearly 250 years are strong enough to endure the onslaught of a man who has shown no respect for the democratic process or the democratic institutions that undergird the entire society and political economy of the United States. So just so everybody knows how the week is going to unfold, we're going to start today with Shelley Alcorn. You'll remember Shelley from about a month ago when she came on and just shared the context of what is now transpiring in the United States. So she's going to give us context today. And then every day between now and Friday, and episodically as we move into the next weeks and this whole electoral process unfolds, Shelley will be our, I would say, a reporter at large who monitors this whole situation very closely. And then each day, starting tomorrow on election day, we're going to have Charles Eisenstein and Vandana Shiva speak to us about the importance of democracy. And then the next day, on Wednesday, we'll have Joe Jaworski and Rianne Eisler, 2 other great public intellectuals of our time. Joe Jaworski's father was the special prosecutor in the Watergate case that helped bring President Nixon down. So he comes out of a very political family. And then on Thursday, we're having Carolyn Baker, who's written extensively on how to navigate through chaos. And we're going to have 2 millennials from California who've been working day in and day out on Get Out the Vote. So we'll have their perspective. And then we're going to conclude on Friday with Otto Scharmer. And I may put in the chat in a little bit his article that just came out, I think, over the last couple of days over the weekend, which is a brilliant analysis of what's going on and what is at stake in this week of election in America. So that's the week that it will be unfolding. We are in unbelievably portentous times, and it is incredible to be alive at one of the most important junctures in all of human history. And tomorrow, November 3rd, is a milestone that they're going to be writing about, in 1,000 years. And we're here to witness it and to participate in it. So thank you all for joining. And Shelley, thank you for all your hard work. Shelley, by the way, is our Chief Operating Officer and Chief Curriculum Officer, and basically runs Ubiquity, is probably my closest partner as we traverse all the things that Ubiquity is engaged in. So Shelley, it's wonderful to be partnering with you on such momentous political matters having to do with the future of America and the world. So I'll just turn over the program to you, and you can wax eloquent for as long as you'd like, and then we'll circle back for dialogue and any questions that are emerging out of the chat. Shelley?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me back again to talk about politics in America and really worldwide. I think there is a cognizance on the part of all of us that this US election has consequences for not only the United States, but for global partners, allies throughout the world, most importantly on climate change and other issues that are critical to the survival of the human species. And that's not overstating it. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. So what I'm going to do today, last time I talked a lot about sort of the process of totalitarianism and that sort of thing. This moment, as we take a breath before tomorrow, is really to talk about process, to talk about some historical precedent, and then to talk about some hints that you can hold in your mind as we move through the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks, the next 4 weeks. So everything is very much in a state of play. There is no particular outcome that anyone can guess. I think those of us who follow the situation closely have our own opinions, but what will be is what will be. And in a highly chaotic and complicated situation, there's really no way to predict how this is going to go. So to ground us all in what is this that we're about to embark on, I'd like to go through some process elements, some timelines, and then some current news to show you sort of how the process is unfolding. So we talked last time about how presidential elections work, and I want to revisit that for just a moment. Presidential elections in the United States have the two features to them. One is a popular vote, one is the electoral college. The popular vote, historically, sometimes, but not all the time, have determined who the president is going to be. However, the electoral college has historically done things as well that have sort of overruled the popular vote. And there is historical precedent that a president or a candidate could lose both the popular vote and the electoral college and still retain power in the United States. Van Jones did an excellent TED Talk about this over the last few days, where he really breaks it down very simply for people who might not be more involved in sort of the arcane nature of elections in the United States. And we have never actually been able to count all of the ballots by the end of election night, particularly as our population has increased in the modern day. Typically, when the election is called by the media, that is a combination of votes that are counted, votes that are outstanding, the counts of absentee votes, and it's based on mathematical modeling. So this idea, this concept that we know who the president is on the night of the election is not because all of the ballots have been counted. It is because it all looks like it's going one way. It typically plays out that way. The mathematical models are sophisticated, and the opposing candidate concedes the election. That's what ends sort of the election furor, if you will, is when the losing candidate, presented with the obvious fact that he probably is not going to prevail in the vote, concedes the election. And at that point, the supporters are asked to back down. the winning candidate steps up, and then we sort of go into autopilot and we sort of rubber stamp the rest of the processes to install the next president. That's kind of how it's gone. Even in modern times, we've seen that hasn't really happened. In 2000 with Bush v. Gore, Gore conceded and then kind of unconceded, and then conceded again. So this is an important thing for us to remember, because we have a candidate in the White House currently, an incumbent president, who has made it very, very clear that he is not going to give a concession speech. The concession speech isn't going to happen. The emotional temperature in the United States is not going to go down on the evening of November 3rd. And a lot of people are expecting it to, particularly if there is a landslide on the Democratic part. People are hoping for a landslide. I'm hoping for a landslide. But that doesn't actually do anything to ensure that Trump does not remain president of the United States. What it does is because he's refusing to concede. What it does is it puts us in a better position to pressure Democratic institutions, Republican lawmakers, et cetera, to call the election, to ensure that the processes work. That doesn't always happen either, because the Electoral College is subject to the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Let's talk about that for a second, because it's actually kind of pertinent when we're looking at how elections have gone in the United States. Obviously, the late 1800s, post-Civil War in the United States was a terribly contentious time. When we talk about systemic racism in the United States, we have obviously a long and bloody history with race relations in the United States, culminating in the Civil War, but then continuing to this very day, which is why we have Black Lives Matter, which is why we have these continued assaults on human dignity and equality in the United States. However, in the 1876 presidential election, we had two candidates. We had a Republican by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes, and then we had a Democrat by the name of Samuel Tilden. Remember, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were sort of switched back in the day. Their particular positions around the Civil War were different. So don't think of Republican and Democrat in the frame that you would use for the modern parties that we have. Samuel Tilden actually won the popular vote. And he did a lot of that winning of the popular vote by using paramilitary groups to intimidate and suppress the vote, particularly in the South, and African-American votes, which we're seeing now with intimidation at the polls. We expect to see quite a bit more of it tomorrow. But Tilden won the popular vote. And when it came down to the Electoral College, Tilden had 184 electoral votes, and Hayes had 165. So there was only a small difference between the Hayes amount of electoral votes and Tilden's electoral votes. What happened was the states of Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon, keep that in mind, that's going to be important when I get to the end of this presentation. They disputed the results. And what they ended up doing is they sent two delegations from their states to the Electoral College, one swearing that Tilden had won the state, the other swearing that Hayes had won the state. Electoral College was thrown into chaos because these separate sets of electors came in, both claiming victory for their particular candidate, and it was thrown to Congress to decide what to do. So the Electoral Count Act, this election ended up in the Compromise of 1877, where the Democrats conceded the election in return for the end of Reconstruction and withdrawal of federal troops from the South. And Rutherford B. Hayes was installed as president of the United States. So there is precedent in our history for not only the popular vote and electoral college to be thrown into chaos, but also for wheeling and dealing and things to happen in the Congress. And then one candidate concedes and then we sort of move on. We had Bush v. Gore, which was another case where the Supreme Court of the United States really came in, stopped a vote recount. And we had a peaceful transfer of power because Al Gore conceded the election, because that is what we're supposed to do. So let's sort of look at the parallels between those sorts of historical examples and what we're dealing with now. The key is the refusal to concede. Lawsuits to stop the counts, which President Trump has said repeatedly over and over and over. Both campaigns have sent lawyers into states and counties all over the US prepared to challenge the ballots, challenge the vote. They could demand that the states refuse to certify the election because each state has to certify its final election results, and they have until December 8th to do that. They could potentially send rival slates of electors to the Electoral College. So one state could be called for Biden, and yet the state legislature could get in an argument, and the Democratic Party and Republican Party could both send electors to the Electoral College, ending up in chaos there. And if it does end up in the US House of Representatives, maybe the Supreme Court doesn't rule on it. maybe it goes a different direction. If it does end up in Congress, what's important to remember is that this is not just because the Congress is currently controlled by Democrats, because the highest population states are Democratic states. So we have the highest proportion of representatives. It actually comes down to delegation that gets the vote. It's one vote per state. And right now, the number of Republican delegations in the House of Representatives outnumbers the number of Democratic delegations. So this is important to keep in mind because there's a lot of confidence, I think, that may be false. That number one, when the election isn't called on November 3rd, people are sort of thinking, well, that's okay because, we'll count absentee ballots and everything will be fine. It'll be settled on the 4th or the 5th. This may not be settled until the end of December. So let's pace ourselves. We're about to run a marathon in the United States. So here's the timeline that we're working with right now. And everyone needs to settle into the fact that unless there is a concession speech, and I doubt that there's going to be one, this is what we have to look forward to for the next 6 weeks. November 3rd, tomorrow, we have the election. November 4th, the counting of mail-in ballots begins in many states. There are differing dates in different states for how long mail-in ballots can be accepted. For example, California's deadline for receiving ballots is November 20th. So that's weeks away. Some states are counting mail-in ballots already. Florida does this. Most states don't. But there's the period of time all the way through November where there are going to be different deadlines for ballots to be accepted. And all of those deadlines are being challenged right now. And we'll talk a little bit more about Texas in a second. December 8th is the safe harbor date for all states to resolve disputes over how many electors they're going to send. So the states themselves have until December 8th to sort of resolve all these conflicts, to go ahead and certify that this is the actual result, and to move forward and have the legislature send the electors in. Slates of electors meet on December 14th to take the official Electoral College vote. They meet in their states, they formally vote. On January 3rd, Congress convenes with those members who were elected in 2020. On January 6th, the electoral votes are formally counted before a joint session of Congress. And on January 20th, we have Inauguration Day. So the time period between November 3rd this year in the election, and January 6th, where the actual vote takes place, is known as the interregnum. And the interregnum is an old term. It's from Latin. It refers to the period of time between the reign of one monarch to the next. Comes from Latin inter, between, and regnum being king. In the United States, we don't have a king or a monarch. And for some unknown reason, we've decided to call it the lame duck session. So the lame duck begins on November 3rd and ends on January 6th. In the lame duck time, however, President Trump is still president. He still has the powers of the presidency. And we still have senators who are willing to support him and many of his ideas. So we need to pay attention to that. Even if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win, lots of things are going to happen between November 3rd and January 6th. Not only to consolidate power, but to potentially make decisions that could affect Americans' lives. Trump has already said in the last few days he's getting ready to fire Anthony Fauci, who is our nation's leading epidemiologist on infectious diseases. And a number of other firings are on the way. So we need to prepare ourselves for that. They have been quite clear on that. So there are two types of coups, the coup d'etat. And there's what's known as the hard coup d'etat, which is a sudden, violent, illegal seizure of power from a government. And we all know what a hard coup d'etat looks like. Usually involves military, usually involves civil war and quite a bit of problem. Then there's the soft coup d'etat. And a soft coup d'etat ends up with the same result, but it's done with the participation of legislators and judges and things that make it look legitimate. So we are finally beginning to use the language in the United States. And I talked about this last time I was with you. The language is very important. And I am finally hearing people use the word coup d'etat and use it in a soft coup d'etat in the media. And I think this is very important that we begin to understand the process that we are in. Most experts who study totalitarianism and study coup d'etat, they will range between what they consider a successful completion of a coup d'etat. It's shorter than you think. Some experts put it around 5 days, others put it around 10 days, but there's sort of a general consensus that a coup d'etat is considered successful if power is seized and held for 7 days. That's just not a lot of time. So 7 days. So 7 days. All right. We have a long, muddy process going over the winter with a global pandemic still raging. We're in the middle of an actual soft coup d'etat. And it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes for it to be successful or unsuccessful. Remember, the landslide only gives us a fighting chance. And the fact and the idea that the supporters of Trump will back down. There's no evidence that they're going to do this. Absolutely none. So there are two things that I'd like to do over the rest of this discussion, and then what I'll be bringing to you as news and information over the next week, even though it's going to continue to go on for a while. And I want to establish a framework for us to think about the process of what's happening in the interregnum here between November 3rd and January 6th. Because we need some way to anchor ourselves in a conceptual framework aside from the chaos of Twitter. Just know that I am in the chaos of Twitter, but I'm sorting these things into really the 5 steps that have been telegraphed, that have been published, that have been claimed, that have been spoken out loud as we've been talking about what's going to happen. So there's really 5 sorts of buckets that the news is all going to thread to as a soft coup d'etat is taking place. And the strategy is pretty basic. The first step is to delegitimize the vote. And we've seen this, Trump started this in 2016. It only got worse during the pandemic when there was, a vast increase in mail-in voting and absentee voting, et cetera, which we have always done, by the way. This is not new. You don't get to take 3 ballots in. They double check, they check you off the list, and you had 1 vote. That was your vote. Okay, there is no voter fraud. There's no election fraud. It has been studied ad nauseum by every university in the world. The United States elections have 9 cases of fraud, like millions and millions of ballots. That's just insane. Okay. So, but delegitimizing the vote, absolutely. So let's take a look at just one instance that we'll talk about. There's many, many, many instances right now that are already being challenged. Supreme Court has already been ruling on whether these votes count or whether these votes don't count. By the way, don't pay attention to the small wins that they're getting right now at the Supreme Court. I know a lot of people were excited that Judge Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from a couple of these ballot counts last week. And they were decided in favor of the more lenient interpretation of the election rules. To be honest, those weren't the states that they really care about. So in a soft coup, you're going to have people who are attempting to make it look like this is balanced and that this is fair because they're not consistently ruling only on the part of one party. I'm telling you, with the Electoral College, it doesn't matter if they consistently rule on the part of one party. It only matters when they rule in the states that have the biggest impact on the Electoral College. And that could come down to 20 votes, 25 votes out of 553 or 500. I should have that off the top of my head. I apologize, I don't. But 550 something votes. So delegitimize the vote. The Texas Republican Party, the Texas elections allowed for absentee voters and mail-in voters to do drive-by drop-off, where election officials stood outside, people didn't have to get out of their cars, they drove by, they handed them the ballots. That was drive-in voting. The Texas Republican Party sued in Texas to have 127,000 of those votes thrown out as uncountable because they were done through drive-by voting, even though the Texas Elections Board had done it. It had been approved. It had been instituted. It was a rule. And now, a day after it ends, the Texas Republican Party is sued. Now, the good news is the Texas Supreme Court ruled on it and said, yes, it's fine. Drive-by voting is fine. Drive-in voting is fine. However, that's only the Texas Supreme Court. This case has now gone to a federal. They're suing in federal court. Remember, the state courts and the federal courts in the United States are different. It's gone to federal court, and they have pulled one of the most consistently partisan judges in Texas in the federal bench to decide this issue, whether they're going to throw 127,000 ballots out in Texas, in a primarily Democratic leaning area. I don't know how that judge is going to rule. They're holding an emergency hearing today. They may have already decided it. It's 8:39 here. It may already be decided, but we'll know the outcome of that federal judge. They may appeal it to a federal appeals court. That one may go to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court is beginning to ask people to segregate ballots that could potentially be contested as they go through and make these additional rulings over the next couple of weeks as to which ballots count and which ballots don't. So this is very, very problematic. Most of the challenges are going to be in states like Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Those are the big ones. Those are the big states that are really hard to call. They're throwing it right up the middle. Please don't believe the polls that say that Biden's going to carry it by 7 points, 10 points. Please don't. There was a high, what they call the hate vote in the United States in 2016, where people were embarrassed to admit they were voting for Trump, and so they wouldn't tell pollsters who they were voting for. They believe that this has happened again, and it's been worse this year than it was last year or in 2016. So please pay attention to that. So delegitimize the vote. They're taking it to every electoral, and they're not going to be fighting necessarily in California. If they got a big one, they'll fight in California for something big, but they're not going to be focusing their efforts on those. They're going to be focusing their efforts on those states where it could potentially matter. So all votes need to be counted. And that's a message that we need to continue to talk about. The second strategy is deter and suppress the vote through intimidation and bullying. So let's talk about the protest march. It was a pro-voting march. They were strolling to the polls, heading to the polls. North Carolina police pepper sprayed voters going in to cast their votes, calling it a disturbance and hurting people. Particularly egregious over the weekend was this idea of what is known as a Trump train. I've seen a Trump train twice now inside my community. A Trump train is just big trucks and cars that are flying Trump flags, the American flag, and in particular, the the Blue Lives Matter flag. And I want to talk about that in terms of symbology. More and more and more at the rallies, President Trump has not been using the red, white, and blue American flag. He does use it. But more and more and more, we're seeing a different flag. We're seeing a black and blue and white flag. That is the American flag with a blue stripe through the middle. Sometimes it's a red, white, and blue flag with a black stripe through the middle. That is supposedly for law enforcement supporters. It's being co-opted. And we need to pay attention to symbols and symbology. Because at the last few rallies, I've seen banks and banks of that black, white, and blue flag. And when candidates begin to use their own iconography, I think that's something we need to pay attention to. Iconography and branding is really, really important. What happened in Texas was a Biden-Harris bus was traveling to a campaign event. Neither Kamala Harris nor Joe Biden were on that bus. There were staffers and different people. A Trump train on video of these trucks surrounded that bus, attempted to kind of run it off the highway, got in front of it and slammed on their brakes, and really, that was an egregious, horrible, unsafe thing to have done on a highway in Texas. The video is on Twitter, the video is online. Trump came out the night it happened, retweeted that video and said, "I love Texas." He doubled down on that yesterday and said, these were patriots. These were patriots in Texas who surrounded that bus and tried to stop it from going to where it was going. The campaign event was obviously canceled that bus was heading to, and they've had to cancel another Democratic campaign event due to the threat of armed militias in another state. So this idea of intimidation and bullying, Trump train shut down a bridge in New York. Like New Yorkers want to have their traffic disrupted, the Trump train stopped and blocked the bridge. This is not being done for nonviolent protest, for social justice, for climate change, Extinction Rebellion. I ain't looking at y'all. You guys are using nonviolent protest. People are trying to compare this to nonviolent protest on social justice or climate justice issues. That is not what happened. What happened when they shut down that bridge with the Trump flags, with the Blue Lives Matter flags, with the other things, is they were demonstrating their power to disrupt. It was an intimidation tactic. we can expect to see this increase over the next few days in the United States. So deter and suppress the vote, particularly in African-American areas. We have had a number of African-American polling places shut down. People are standing in line for 10 to 12 hours to vote. 10 to 12 hours. To suppress the vote, Texas, gotta love Texas. Texas went and decided that there would only be one location where you could drop off an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot per county. What was awful about that is that was upheld. When I talked about it last time we got together, I was hoping that someone would overrule that and they would reopen their election drop-off places. They did not. However, the Texas Election Board did do some good things. They started opening up their other election, early election, 24 hours to accommodate people who couldn't get in. So there are efforts to go the other direction, okay, in spite of the things that are happening. However, Texas did have that one box per county thing upheld by the courts. And that should make us all really worry. Okay, so there are our examples. Now, number 3, so we're going to be talking about delegitimizing the vote. So I'm going to be watching Twitter, I'm going to be watching the news, looking for these efforts to delegitimize the vote, to throw it out, to say it's not valid, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also going to be looking on for news articles, and please do so yourselves, on who's deterring and suppressing the vote and what mechanisms are they using? Are they using intimidation? Are they using procedural? Are they using the courts? What are they doing in order to suppress the vote? 3, they're going to contest it with legal challenges. And Trump said yesterday he's going to send his lawyers in. If they don't declare him the winner on November 3rd, he's going to send his lawyers in on the evening of November 3rd. To shut down the vote. So that's going to be fun. So I'm going to be watching those legal challenges, and they're coming fast and furious right now, and I'll only report on the big ones that I come across for you. The 4th strategy is to arm twist the electors who don't vote until 6 weeks from now. So they're going to be arm twisting electors. All sorts of shenanigans have happened in the past. With arm twisting electors, promising them things, having state legislatures deciding that they can't certify their own vote because they say there's fraud or whatever, and they're going to put their own slate of electors in to elect Trump, in spite of the fact that their popular vote in their state might have gone the other way. And the 5th is to count on and call for political violence, to actually call for it. And we're seeing this more and more and more. We're seeing this more and more. They're not even dog whistles anymore. They're not even suggestions. They're asking people to stand back and stand by. The International Crisis Group issued a 30-page report recently. They are a group that watches political instability, violence, and different collapses internationally. It's the first time that they've issued a report, I think, on the US in particular. 30-page report, and their ultimate conclusion is the United States faces unfamiliar danger in the coming days. There are countries in the world that are politically unstable. There are coups d'etats, there are military takeovers, there's all sorts of political overthrowing going left and right. The United States is in unfamiliar territory, and putting our citizens in unfamiliar territory when they're already scared and they're already angry and they're already well armed is kind of problematic. In response to this, the law enforcement agencies across the board have been preparing for this for the last few weeks, and they've stepped their preparations up. The California Highway Patrol last week put all of their officers on what they call domestic tactical alert. So they are serving 12-hour shifts back to back. There's no leave for officers. They are ready to go and be deployed at any time. Los Angeles Police Department has been conducting training on handling domestic disturbance. New York NYPD is also doing the same. Many downtowns are being boarded up. Washington, D.C. businesses are being boarded up. In New York, businesses are being boarded up. Lots of areas in major cities around the country are currently being boarded up. And we're not used to this, and we're not used to how we are supposed to react. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Report came out in the last few days. And they have targeted the states that are most likely to see violence post-election. That would be Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Oregon. If that sounds familiar to people, that's because that's where ICE and CBP and these unmarked troops of Trump's have been practicing. So let's beware of what's happening there. To a lesser extent, states at moderate risk are judged to be North Carolina, Texas, Virginia, California, New Mexico, all at moderate risk, and then lower risk in other states. So there are international bodies, there are bodies that are doing research on this that are giving us some ideas about where and when these particular groups might be deployed. There are 9 major militia groups in the United States identified by groups, including Southern Poverty Law Center and the Armed Conflict Report. They're known as, when you hear these words on social media, or if you hear these terms, these are United States people who call themselves militias. The idea of the militia was really a 1700s idea. It was not a modern idea. The media is beginning to refer to them as domestic terror groups, as opposed to militia, which sounds a little more official. The 3 percenters, the Proud Boys, that was the group that President Trump spoke to. People's Right, the Oath Keepers, the Lightfoot Militia, the Civilian Defense Force, the American Patriot People, American Contingency, Patriot Prayer, and the Boogaloo Boys. So this is something that's been on the radar for a while. Now let's look at the actions that Trump is taking right now. And by the way, I just looked down and I just saw Trump always tells us what he's going to do at his rallies. Yeah, he does, absolutely. Masha Gessen told us 4 years ago, believe the autocrat. So I'm going to tell you what Trump has been broadcasting over the last few days and last week that I find concerning and I think we should watch for. Number one, during this COVID recovery period and during the campaign, he began to use the White House as a backdrop. So United States presidents are not supposed to use the people's house for political events. Not their house, it's the people's house. They are supposed to take their political events off the grounds of the White House. Trump is the first president, in my knowledge, who has absolutely broken that completely. And he's done it on a number of occasions recently, his COVID taking off the mask moment on the balcony, et cetera, et cetera. Trump has canceled the election night party that was scheduled to happen at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. And they've rescheduled it to happen at the White House itself. And I think that's really key for people to understand. Trump is passing up the opportunity to profit off of an election party that is supposed to be held at one of his own hotels to move that party to the White House. So when you see a man motivated by money like that, suddenly giving up all that money and saying, hey, why don't y'all come to the White House instead? I think there's something to pay attention to there. Trump has also told his campaign staffers to clear their calendars for November for continued rallies. So his staff is on alert now to continue the rallies after the election. Going to states in particular, I believe where the vote is close. I think that's where they're going to concentrate, but they'll make those decisions as the votes come in, as they decide to deploy their resources. So he is not going to stop rallying. He's going to be on the road next week and the week after. Trump put in a new executive order just a week and a half ago that basically revamps hiring and firing of government employees. Currently, used to be, federal employees were protected from changes in political party because they were career service people. So they were allowed to continue to do their jobs, regardless of who was in the White House, regardless of what party had control of Congress. We had an intellectual well of people who do their jobs and know what their jobs are in the FBI, State Department, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it is pretty hard to fire folks, and that's for good reason, because someone can come in with a political axe to grind and clear house. And we've seen Trump clearing house for quite a bit. This goes deeper. This goes deeper. And in fact, one of the people who sit on the Federal Employees Board, and I forgot what the technical name for that is, resigned in protest over this. He is basically making it easier to fire anybody who does not share his political beliefs. So we have a very dangerous executive order that's been placed that gives them the right to reclassify federal employees who work in and around with Trump, to be able to easily fire them if they do not agree with Trump's policies or his politics. So this is very dangerous. It's something that just happened. So we need to pay attention to that. And last but not least, they began constructing an unscalable fence around the White House and other areas in Washington, D.C. in preparation for what they feel are going to be protests, etc. So, unscalable fence, barricading himself in, moving the election night party to the White House to co-opt the White House visuals, will not concede, has told he's sending attorneys in. The United States has not faced anything like this before in the modern era. We do not know how to deal with this. The closest we came was 2000. By the way, fun fact, Roger Stone, Trump confidant and close associate who got a pardon recently, was behind the people who attacked and went in and just broke into the Florida election boards to try and stop the vote in 2000. So let's just bear that in mind. They have practice at this. They have practice at this. So, okay, so that's where we're at. That's just the facts. That's just what's happening. That is what the process looks like. That is what the tactics look like. This is what is happening that are put into those buckets, and I'll be reporting on those buckets basically when I come on and letting you know, is this delegitimizing the vote? Is this contesting the electors? What is a legal challenge? Is it political violence? So I'll be putting those things into place. So now let's do this. Because we need to have a toolkit. And I think Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny is a wonderful toolkit. He has 20 rules for dealing with and countering tyranny. And I'm going to be bringing 5 of these rules to you a day for the rest of this week, because I think this is really important. And I've broken them up into what I think are appropriate for the day. So if we're going to resist this process, we need to settle in for the long haul. We need to be prepared for the shock. We need to be prepared mentally and physically, emotionally and spiritually to hear things we don't want to hear, and to stay centered in nonviolence, in peace, in cooperation, in a place of strength. So here are a few things for you to keep in mind over the next couple of days, courtesy of Timothy Snyder, Dr. Timothy Snyder. His first rule for resisting tyranny is do not obey in advance. So most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given, as he says. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government would want, and they begin to offer themselves to do those things without being asked. So do not obey in advance. Do not teach power what it can do. Secondly, investigate. Figure things out for yourself. Double check me too. I may say things that are wrong. Do your own research. I have no problem with that. Anyone who's being intellectually honest shouldn't have a problem with that. So investigate, figure things out for yourself, spend time with long articles, subsidize investigative journalism, learn about sites that investigate propaganda, make sure it's not propaganda. Okay? Make sure it's not propaganda that you are listening to. Over the next few days, one of Timothy Snyder's rules to resisting tyranny, make eye contact and small talk. Make eye contact with people. Make small talk with people. Try to stay in touch with your neighbors. Try and stay in touch with people in the grocery store. Try to do those small acts of kindness to defuse or to allow people to think of you as the other. Make eye contact, be a person, say hello, hold a door. I know it sounds really weird, but it's one of those nice, kind things that we can do to help sort of take the edge off of people so they don't see you as an enemy. And we don't see other people as an enemy, okay? Beware of the one-party state. Obviously, we still have two parties. However, we're now in the process of exploiting a historic moment to make political life impossible for the opponents. So vote while you can. Vote in, that's what Timothy says, literally, vote in local and state elections while you can. Consider running for office. So vote, 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 vote. And the last hint for resisting tyranny for today, heading in tomorrow, listen for dangerous words. Be alert to the words extremism, terrorism, be alive to the fatal notions of emergency and exception. Be angry about the treacherous use of patriotic vocabulary. Use the vocabulary that is appropriate for the moment. Okay? Use the vocabulary that is appropriate to the moment. I do not know how things are going to go, but I'm going to be paying close attention to it. And I'm going to be bringing you ideas, news, and trying to help you navigate through the next few weeks, as they are going to be something that you are unfamiliar with, something that I am unfamiliar with, and putting it into perspective. Putting it into perspective is the important part. So I'd be happy to respond to any questions. I'm going to hand it back to Jim to sort of put this into context, anything that hit him as I was talking that he would like to reinforce or anything like that. I appreciate the opportunity to just come and talk with you all about this. Please meditate, stay in peace, be careful, be aware, make contact, do what you can. So thanks.
Thank you, Shelley. For some reason, I'm unable to start my video. So Rick, maybe if you could check that, that would be very kind. Boy, Shelley, thank you so much. I didn't know about the new kind of flag with the different colors and the black stripe going through the middle. What do you know about the origin of that? How is that very recent? Because I've not seen that.
That's recent. After Black Lives Matter began, it was a resistance move to Black Lives Matter. It was an opponent, and the opponent view was Blue Lives Matter.
Gotcha.
That the police lives matter, and then all lives matter. Those are both used as grenades against Black Lives Matter to delegitimize Black Lives Matter. That flag came from, I think, there are some people who just really, they have law enforcement family members or, things like that, and they think they're supporting the police when they put that flag up, that black, white, and blue flag. The problem is that imagery is being co-opted now into the Trump campaign. In that if we're not careful, that will become the flag. That will become the flag. And he's doing it on purpose because he needs as many law enforcement people to support him, put down protesters, et cetera, as he can. So that's one of the reasons why you're seeing many, 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 many more of those flags officially put up at the rallies, in addition to the regular American flag. My mom was wondering what it was. She was like, why are they flying this flag that looks like the American flag, but it isn't? That's where it came from.
Gotcha. And the other thing I'd love you to go into a little bit more detail about is the shift to the White House from the Trump Hotel. Is that simply to identify Trump with the presidency? How do you see that playing out symbolically on election night?
Well, symbolically, it goes back to the my language he's been using. So for example, for those of you who don't know, there was, I don't remember if it was the 3%ers or which one of the groups it was in Michigan, who the FBI came in and the DOJ came in and broke up an assassination attempt against the governor of Michigan. Trump continues to attack her, by the way, which is fun. And when the Democratic governor of Michigan came out and said, I believe that this attack is being spurred on by Trump and the rhetoric that he's using, Trump went on campaign speech and said, my FBI. It was my DOJ that broke up the attempt on her life, and she's not being grateful enough to me. She's actually trying to blame me when it was my FBI who stopped the plot. So he started referring to the White House more commonly, just sprinkling it in, my house. It's my house. It's my home. I believe we're going to hear that my home language, my house language on November 3rd. And he's going to use the physical presence of the White House the way he did in COVID, and to make it look like that's his house. You're trying to kick him out of his house and he's not going. So he's using it to very, very much personalize his claim on the presidency, regardless of how the vote turns out. He's going to declare himself the victor regardless on the 3rd, I believe. So that's the concern that I have. He's not even trying to, he's passing up money. like if he's passing up money, y'all, there's some nefarious going on there. I'm kidding, kind of, but it's a signal. When greedy people do things, you have to sit and go, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Oh wait, I think it does. I think he's going to use my language, my house, my country, my FBI, my attorney general, my military. He uses that a lot.
Generals.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then let's talk a little bit more about, what happened with the governor in Michigan there, and the kind of just the plethora of these extreme white supremacist groups and the relationship to the Trump administration and the Trump campaign, because I was reading that just the sheer number of these groups now are in the hundreds all over the country, and it's being linked with massive numbers of gun sales and ammunition sales, where the shelves are quite literally empty of ammunition, with a country with already over 300 million guns. There's more guns than there are people in the United States. Yeah. But since the pandemic began, since the last month with the election, all of that has escalated. I'd love for you to give a little bit more texture about what they're doing, and because I think a lot of those are the same kind of people that were in the Trump truck lines that were intimidating the bus and closing down the bridge. So there's kind of a fusion of that extreme rightist domestic terrorist network and the Trump campaign, both in terms of rhetoric and the symbiotic relationship through the Twitter feed, whereby and through which he's identifying them as loyal supporters and loyal patriots.
Mhm. To do that, we have to go back a little bit in history. We have always had these groups, I think. Upon the election of President Barack Obama, there was a massive proliferation of them. The white supremacists were outraged that an African American had been elected as president. And so their tone and their tenor and their rhetoric and their training and their equipping went on throughout the entire Obama presidency. So let's take that into account. They were angry and they were mad through the entire 8 years that President Obama was in the White House. When Trump came in as just a pendulum swing, they saw their opportunity because he refused to disavow people such as the Ku Klux Klan in America, David Duke. He pretended he didn't know who David Duke was, the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. For those of you who may not know who they were, they are a white supremacist group who terrorize African Americans and people of color. They've done it for years and years and years. They're still around. The neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, they have a friendly alliance, as it were. They have the same objectives. So once Trump came in and began, putting in the Muslim bans and doing things on the border and et cetera, they began to feel that their opportunity was here because he was willing to do things that no one else was willing to do. So let's bear that in mind. They've always been here. They were angry for 8 years. They've had 4 years to prepare to protect their guy because their guy is willing to do the things that they didn't think they would ever see a president willing to do. By the way, that does bring me to something else. Stephen Miller, the architect of many, many bad things in the United States, one of President Trump's advisors, and extremely anti-immigration, has released their plan for immigration after the election. It is much worse than anything they've done so far. So they have been telegraphing to these groups, we're going to extend Muslim bans, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to be harder on immigration than they were in the last 4 years. So they're throwing that red meat out, that we're going to be doing what you want if you help us. So it's not an explicit bargain. It's always implicit to give him plausible deniability. And that's just the nature of the militia threat that we face in the United States. They're armed, they're ready. And gun sales are continuing to go off the route. Ammunition is flying off the shelves. There's shortages everywhere. And it's not just those people. It's a lot of normal American citizens who are afraid and who are purchasing weapons themselves out of fear. So, it's problematic.
Now, Catherine Alexander and Kat Haber are asking a similar question about where's the Pentagon in all this? What are our military leaders who are supposed to be protecting our democracy? Surely, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you could add the intelligence agencies, most of which are now dominated by Trumpist loyalists. But the military, what's your information as to what the military is thinking? Are they on standby? Are they inclined to let the coup happen? What's your read?
This is, of course, this is the $100,000 question, right? This is $1 million question. What does the United States military do? I've been watching their official communication channels. And a week or so ago, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, the American military released a statement saying that they were not going to intervene with a domestic electoral dispute. The Democrats took that to mean they weren't going to side with Trump and keep him in office. the Trump supporters, and I hesitate to call them Republicans. They're not even Republicans anymore. Let's call them Trump supporters. Trump supporters took that to mean they're not going to intervene if we stay. So the military is attempting to publicly hold a face of neutrality, saying they're not going to do anything about it, that they're going to let the process work in the states. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. And I don't know if push comes to shove, if they will defer to the commander-in-chief or if they will act to uphold the Constitution. Part of their problem is all of this popular vote electoral college nonsense is in the Constitution itself. So they have an out if they want to take the excuse that they're not going to intervene because they're upholding a constitutional process and the system worked even though Trump stayed in power. I don't know what they're going to do. The fact that they're publicly maintaining neutrality could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. And I wish I knew. I think the next few days will be instructive. I know the National Guard is being called up and being ready to be deployed into cities across the US this week. If necessary. I hope it's not necessary. I think if we see what the National Guard does, I think we might get some clues as to what the military is going to do. I don't know.
Yeah, and particularly if it's a kind of a soft coup where the legalities are technically adhered to, under which is the corruption of a perverted process, but from a juridical legal point of view, there's technically a constitutional process. You can see that the military would have an extremely difficult time, given the history of the separation of kind of church and state, and the tradition of the civilians always command the military. Yeah. That this could get pretty excruciating, like it did in the year 2000 with Bush v. Gore, where a similar process happened of a different nature in a different time, but still a gentle coup.
Yep. Yeah, it was, and I would say that was definitely the incident. What we had then was this idea that, well, it's okay. It'll be all right. These guys aren't really that different, right? There's kind of this lackadaisical kind of what could the impact of this be? In 2016 and 2020, we found out what the impact of 2000 actually was, and that's very difficult to decide. And so I don't know what they're going to do. I do know that the military has a vested interest in protecting their funding. And we fund them to the tune of billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I know they have targets that they would like to go use the toys on. So who knows?
Right. Well, thank you, Shelley, and thank you, everyone. It's been very thoughtful in the chats. Shannon MacArthur is just making the point. If this was happening in North Korea, we'd be reading about it and kind of smiling. Oh yeah, these little tin pot dictatorships. This is what they do. But it's happening in the United States of America, and the main protagonist is the president of the United States. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, guys. No. This is like you just can't make this stuff up. And when you think, we didn't get into it, but you think of that deep subterranean collusion that's happening between everything you described and the Russians and Vladimir Putin and the Russian hackers and the manipulation, the cyber warfare against the hospitals and our electoral process and the machines and social media, which we didn't get into today, but is intimate and integral to everything that's happening. You've got a full-scale Shakespearean drama on our hands, And so I really want to appreciate what you're providing for us, Shelley. It is masterful and it's deeply insightful. And, you know, and in the end, it's scary. Yeah, I mean, I was feeling fear. And I think that's a healthy instinct at the moment.
It is.
You know, that it's always important to look the truth right in the eye. And I think the service that you're providing is for us to use language appropriate to the actual situation. And I think one of the distinctions that you just made, which I think we can maybe go into over the next number of days, is the distinction between the Republican Party, which has essentially ceased to exist.
Yes.
And now basically the sycophants and followers of Donald Trump as a kind of a cult leader. And it's worth remembering that that's the transformation that happened with the Nazis.
That's right.
As they ceased at some point to become a party and became a mass organization with cultic symbology around a revered leader who was considered to be messianically gifted and could do no wrong. And you see the same process happening around Trump and with particular ferociousness among the evangelical Christians.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's worth also noting that it was the evangelical Christians that were the strongest supporters of Hitler.
Yes.
So there's just something very both sinister but integral around this phenomenon of Trump that is giving him so much power in the electoral process as it's now unfolding. So thank you so much. And we'll be gathering here again tomorrow, everyone. This is the only game in town this week. There's other things happening, but starting on the East Coast of the United States tomorrow, where the American people cast their ballots, and then how that will ensue as to which ballots are counted and which one are tied up in knots and not counted is the drama of the attempted coup that is now unfolding in American democracy. So thank you, Shelley, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central European time. And first up will be Shelley, just to give us a report. And then we'll have the dialogue with Charles Eisenstein and Vandana Shiva about the nature of democracy and the future of humankind. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.